It's Friday, October 27th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It's a hell of a day to talk ball, and join me to do just that you hear him, it's James Koh. What is it? What is this, a crossover episode? James, what's going on, buddy?
It's the crossover the people demanded. So I'm more than happy, and I'm honored to be a guest on this podcast, man.
Yeah, this should be pretty clunky. You know, James and I don't know each other very well. We haven't done a lot of programs together. So for the audience, just bear with us as we try to sort of figure out our timing. But no, on a serious note, you guys know James. If you know me, you know James Koh, my partner in crime at Reception Perception, a long time friend going back to the NFL Network days. So I probably should have said something about fantasy freaks and geeks to start this off, but nevertheless, man, I'm happy you're doing this with me.
I mean, we've done hundreds of shows now. It's kind of insane, but this is the first time we're doing this one. And actually, Matt, it's kind of a treat for me because it's the first time I'm not actually hosting a show with you. I'm just going to be sitting along for the ride. I like it.
That actually is a good point. We have never switched chairs before. I always say this, right? 'Cause I host this show 5 times a week, to the point that, like, when we do the Reception Perception show, I'm able to just like kick back and not have to worry about timing and tempo and all of that stuff. So, which, by the way, timing and tempo, I'm already throwing that off here as we start. So let's waste no more time. Let's get into the business of the show here. For you people out there, the uninitiated, the Cobros who are coming over and finding this podcast just now, what we do on our preview shows, we go through what we are calling the viewer's guide. So reminder how this works. There are games you want to binge every single week. Those are like the shows that you just can't miss. You're watching as soon as it's live, and you may just crush all the episodes in one weekend. There are also games you want to stream. Those are like the shows, you're going to watch them start to finish, but you're not probably finishing them all in one weekend. Maybe it's over the course of a few weeks. These are the games that could kind of go either way from an NFL perspective. There's, some interesting fantasy storylines, but not a ton of must starts. And lastly, there are the games you want to skip. These are like the shows you're kind of leaning on passing. You might catch an episode here or there just so you can stay up with the memes. Maybe you're just reading a few recaps. I don't know. James, does that make any sense?
Of course it does. Absolutely. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to rock and roll. Let's do it.
All right, let's dive into the Week 8 Fantasy Football Viewers Guide, and let's start off with the games you want to binge, starting with, James, the LA Rams at Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are 6.5-point favorites. We've got a pretty nice little 45.5 over-under. I'll be honest with you, buddy, not a ton of games I see like in the binge category this week. It was a little bit tough. There's a lot of streams, so I think even Rams Cowboys I could kind of sort of see going either way. But what's got your eye, taking in on this game?
I'm keeping an eye on CD Lamb here. I think he's got a really, really good matchup with the secondary that he's facing against the Rams. They've been really tough on outside wide receivers, but CD Lamb, who plays 67% in the slot, the Rams not so good inside. They've allowed the 3rd most yards and the 8th most receptions to the slot per game. And Lamb, of course, has scored double-digit PPR points in all but one game this year. I think he actually has a really good chance to put up like a 20 spot in this game if it holds up in terms of the scoring.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, us CD Lamb bros would really appreciate that. He at this point, his first read target share is down from last year to this year. I think they have been a little bit plays over players lately to start the season for Dallas,
absolutely.
Right?
Not a little bit, a lot. Oh yeah, that's the Mike McCarthy way. Come on now.
It is the Mike McCarthy way. I don't think we need 10 target games to this version of Michael Gallup anymore, but I'm hoping that coming off the bye week, we see a much more constricted target share, mostly flowing through CD Lamb. I'm curious, kind of, what's your take on Tony Pollard at this point in the season? Because if you this has sort of been making its way on fantasy Twitter lately. Like, if you look at the rushing charts from Tony Pollard last year to this year, they're getting him on these outside runs a lot more. And this year, it's so much more like up the gut, inside stuff. I'm like, you know what that looks like? That looks like a dude who went from a change of pace role to a real running back role. So that's sort of my thought on it. I don't know where you stand on Pollard and whether he's a buy low sort of right now or a guy that like is just going to kind of be what he is right now.
It's so interesting too, because anytime you look at running back charts, a player who doesn't run outside a lot generally doesn't produce. It's so hard in the NFL to produce when you're running inside. And I've said that for years and years and years now. I don't understand, Matt, we're getting off track here, but I don't understand when you look at the Shanahan system and you look at what Sean McVay is doing, these guys are running outside zone, outside gap concepts. Every team should be doing this, and I don't understand why they're not. So it doesn't make any sense to me. But you're right. Look, you know what it is too? Yeah, you're right. He's getting some of those Zeke carries now, and that's bringing his averages all down, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But again, to your point of Mike McCarthy, plays over players, you got to understand your players, and I'd love to see Mike McCarthy say, all right, man, we got to scrap some of this run game stuff and just go outside zone concepts or outside gap concepts and just utilize the strengths of an explosive player like Pollard. But yeah, I do think that he's a buy low candidate for sure.
I think so too. And I think really the farther we get away from him breaking his damn leg in the playoffs last year, I think the better that we'll get here. I think some players, ancillary guys like Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks, Ferguson, you're probably playing if you have him, because there's just not a ton of other dudes with his type of role at the tight end position right now, even if it's been a little hit or miss. Cooks, I still think is sort of on the roster bubble of fantasy teams right now, but if we get another performance like we got against the Chargers this week, he's going to sort of, or last time they played, he'll sort of start to be in the good graces. I want to talk about the Rams here. Let's put the backfield aside for a second, because it's just like, I don't know what to say. It just is what it is. Passing game wise, we talked about this on our show over at Reception Perception this week, sort of the dynamic of Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Is there really any reason to be concerned, or with Cooper Kupp's slow performance, or how do you kind of see which receiver, if you had to pick between the two in this particular matchup, do you think is in the better spot?
Well, first of all, if you bring me on this show, I'm not going to be scared with hot takes. Okay.
Obviously.
This is, to me, is a screaming Cooper Kupp game. One, because, he had a slow game last week, and Cooper Kupp it just doesn't happen 2 games in a row. So to me, this is a screaming Cooper Kupp game, mostly because of the matchups too. Dallas not that great inside. And again, when I start looking at the defensive metrics and everything, the Dallas Cowboys have been really good on outside wide receivers, man. They've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to the outside. 46.3% completion rate allowed is the 2nd best when analyzing cornerback matchups to the outside. What does that mean? To me, I look at that and I'm thinking, do I got the stones to go out and say fade Puka Nacua? Because I think that's what I'm going to do, man.
Oh,
Dallas
no.
with the highest quarterback pressure rate in the NFL. I feel like that could wreck the Rams game plan in terms of trying to get the ball to the outside. So, man, I don't know. I think I'm going to go out and just 10 toes. I'm just going to go ahead and say fade Puka Nacua this week.
Oh, great. Well, I'm sure this won't come back to bite us in the ass. I've been saying all week about how good Puka looks, right? And how things are going well for him, and how honestly, again, we said this on our show that if JSN was doing what Puka Nacua was doing right now, he'd be like an ungettable dynasty asset, right? It would be impossible. But I do understand, and one more point just on this anti-Puka stuff we're on right now that I really don't like. Dallas has played a good bit of man coverage. They're one of the more man coverage heavy defenses in the league. While I think that Puka can beat man coverage, and I don't really buy into the narrative that he's just a zone beater, they have tended to go away from Puka in some of these man coverage situations. So that is at least another thing to watch there in terms of that particular matchup for Puka Nacua. All right, you have any hot takes on the backfield before we move on here?
I just think Darrell Henderson's a little bit of a fade for me. I'm not 100% sure what the rotation's going to look like. Royce Freeman's getting still a lot of good work there. It feels like a 50-50 split versus a really solid Dallas defense. 7th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. 3.59 yards per carry allowed. That's 9th best. And again, I know he scored that touchdown last week, but you take that off the board, man, and I don't know. I feel like Darrell Henderson might be a little bit of a fade this week.
Fair enough. I think Royce Freeman honestly looked a little bit better than Darrell Henderson last week.
I agree 100%.
Which isn't saying a lot. So, all right, let's move on to the next game here. Jacksonville Jaguars, 2.5-point road favorites going into Pittsburgh with the 41.5 over-under. James, I have a game that features the Pittsburgh Steelers and a 41.5-point over-under in the binge category. So, again, when I say it was kind of a tough week to put games into the binge category, I think that really makes my point here. I am a little bit of a sucker for some of the Steelers offensive stuff, not because I like what Matt Canada does or I'm all that high on Kenny Pickett, but it's because of these two receivers. Deontay Johnson, I think, looked really good in his return. I think George Pickens is having a really nice year. But Jacksonville's defense has quietly been one of the biggest reasons I think that this team is not necessarily outkicking expectations, but a reason that Jacksonville's been very different. Like, I was talking with somebody the other day. It's like, well, some of this pass volume that like Jacksonville's high pass rates got to lift up some of these, guys like Calvin Ridley at some point, right? So, well, they're actually 25th in passing play percentage this year because this defense and this run game has outkicked expectations. So I can see this game, James, going either way, from like a high scoring, interesting fantasy game. I could also see the Jaguars, who run the ball better than people expect and play defense better than people expect, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are absolute experts in dragging you down into the muck and the mire. How does this game play out? Because I could see it going either way.
I think their run game honestly has been the best part of their entire team, to be honest with you. I think their passing game has been really up and down, and I think their defense has been really up and down too. You're right, they're sneaky better than what we anticipated. But you know what? They're really gettable on the outside, man. They've allowed the third most yards per game to outside wide receivers. They've allowed the second most fantasy points per game to outside wide receivers, and they're also second to last in quarterback pressure rate as well. So if Pittsburgh can just hold up their end of the bargain, I agree with you. This has a sneaky potential to be a little bit of a shootout here, because if you think about it, Jacksonville struggling on the against outside wide receivers. Well, what does Pittsburgh like to do? They've got now two pretty good outside wide receivers in Deontay Johnson and George Pickens. I feel like, again, if Kenny Pickett can just hold up his end of the bargain, Pittsburgh's got a chance to put some points on Jacksonville.
Buddy, it's all they do well from an offensive perspective. Pittsburgh doesn't have a good run game.
Nope.
Allen Robinson's not giving them much from a slot receiver perspective.
Nope.
Obviously, Pat Freiermuth, tight end, is not going to play in this game. That's actually, you bringing this up is a good point, because Jacksonville's outside cornerback coverage, certainly, I agree, is the second most questionable thing about this defense, second only to their pass rush. Josh Allen for the Jags defense is very good. Trayvon Walker has not really emerged as that premium pass rusher. They're in the mix for like a Chase Young type of trade at the deadline or Danielle Hunter trade at the deadline. Like, that's where they're at, because they don't rush the passer really well, which also, again, trickles out to how you're covering outside receivers. So their linebackers have played really well. Oluokun, really good player. That middle of the field is actually where they're better from a defensive perspective. So I kind of sneaky like the matchup, now that you're talking about this, for a George Pickens or a Deontay Johnson. And then let's say Pittsburgh is able to take advantage of that matchup and put up some points. On the Jacksonville side, going against Pittsburgh actually has pretty similar issues. They rush the passer really well, obviously, with TJ Watt, but we know they give it up to outside receivers. They give it up to outside receivers in man coverage. This does, I know people are going to hate it because of how it went last week, but it does set up for a pretty decent theoretical matchup advantage for Calvin Ridley, one of the most hated men in fantasy.
One catch performance last week, man. He is in the dirt for sure for a lot of fantasy managers, no doubt. You're right. It's a great matchup. Pittsburgh has allowed the 10th most fantasy points per game to outside wide receivers. Ridley's played primarily, almost exclusively, pretty much outside there. And again, Ridley, 87% outside snap percentage, right? So, man, it's tough, right? Because Ridley has scored 7 or fewer points in full PPR in 4 of 6 games, Matt. But it's that upside too, where you're just like, all right, well, this guy could also put a 20 spot on the board. That's what's crazy, which is nuts with Ridley. So it's just all up and down. I'm still tentatively saying he's a start because the matchup is really good. You talk about the quarterback pressure percentage. Pittsburgh, 4th best in terms of quarterback pressure rate. So, yeah, again, Jacksonville is such a hot and cold team, especially with their passing game, man. But this does, I just feel like this has the potential and will be a higher scoring game, higher scoring than I think most folks will anticipate.
Interesting note from Jacob Gibbs on Calvin Ridley. Press coverage has been an issue from like a production standpoint for Ridley so far this year. When he faces press coverage, Jacob notes 14.2% target per route run rate, 0.89 yards per route run. When not pressed, 24% target per route run rate, 2.06 yards per route run. And I do think, James, if we're talking about Calvin Ridley, the player, I would say that one of the issues that has bothered him to start this year has actually been press coverage. Not like a disaster type of situation, but I do think from getting him going into routes early, he's been slightly below average against press coverage, certainly not up to his usual standards that we saw in Atlanta, right? Like, and I think some of that is, hey, as you tried to warn me to start the year, guy hasn't played football for a year and a half. The actual speed of the game, getting off the line cleanly, could be an issue to start this year. So without a lot of press coverage, that Pittsburgh, not a lot of press coverage there, could be a good spot for him to get right. So I like that there. I do kind of think I like Pittsburgh and the points from like a betting angle, because they can easily just win this game at home. The fact that you're getting Mike Tomlin as a home dog when they're freaking 4-2, man. Like, everybody talks about the Steelers as if they're a terrible team. They're a winning team.
I know. It's kind of crazy. By the way, speaking of, like, I feel like the time off in regards to press coverage, because you could run routes against air, but what you're not doing is in that year and a half off, what you're not doing is getting physical press coverage, like, at all. You're just not used to the physicality of the game right then and there, right?
Training camp, preseason too. Like,
none of it.
They're not running press coverage like, oh, I'm going to mimic AJ Terrell or Marshawn Lattimore, like pressing your ass off the line. They're not doing that in training camp. So that is something that maybe we see Calvin Ridley by the end. Like I said, his reception perception success rates right now against press is like 64%, which is sub average. It's well below what we expect. But if he gets up to north of 70 by the end of the year, as he gets more accustomed to it, I wouldn't be surprised by that. But either way, I know it's hard to stomach starting Calvin Ridley after what you got last week, but I do think this is the right spot to potentially chase that upside. And obviously, that doesn't mean that you're dinging Christian Kirk expectations either. He's still very well set up in this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the next game. And the only one I could stomach putting in the last one I could stomach putting in the binge category here. Cincinnati Bengals coming off their bye, going into San Francisco to potentially take on your guy, Sam Darnold here. So
let's go.
The 49ers are still 3.5 point favorites as of recording, 43.5 over under. So both these teams actually are a really fascinating conversation right now at this point, just because of where the Bengals are. But let's start with San Francisco. And I'm asking a biased source. Again, James' bold prediction leading into the season was that, Sam Darnold was basically going to revive his career, just dripping with Pac-12 bias over there, Pac 50, Pac 80, whatever it's freaking called now. I don't know. Anyways, I'm asking a biased source when I say this, but James Koh, Brock Purdy doesn't play in this game. Sam Darnold starts this game. Do you ding expectations for any of these mainline 49ers players?
Oh, absolutely not.
God,
come on. No. Listen, the arm talent has always been there, right? So in terms of like how the offense is going to function, the turnovers is the general, problem child here with Sam Darnold. So from a fantasy perspective, as we've seen with many quarterbacks, it's the Blake Bortles effect. It's like, all right, you throw some picks. It doesn't hurt the other guys in fantasy because now you've got to just pass it more, right? So I think from that perspective, I think it should be fine from a fantasy perspective. Now, is it going to help San Francisco win games? No. And to be honest with you, from a real life perspective, I think this is the most interesting game because San Francisco's, again, what are they going to do with this new quarterback, Cincinnati Bengals? They're really trying to find an identity right now and just trying to get back into that mix, because in the preseason, the Bengals were I don't know, one of 4 or 5 teams that you were going to say, okay, this is a team that could potentially get to the Super Bowl. And right now they're absolutely struggling to stay afloat. So from a real life perspective, I think this is actually the most interesting game.
100%. And Bengals defense this year has been like, some of their metrics are down. They're still 10th in dropback success rate, dropback EPA allowed, but they're 14th in dropback success rate. Their rushing numbers are actually a little under expectation. A lot of that is because they've been on the field for so much longer, because that offense has been going real fast to get off the field, like 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. Joe Burrow not pushing the ball down the field. So right. I think it's kind of like a mixed bag in terms of what I think this matchup looks like for Sam Darnold. If it's at the same time too, like we've seen Lou Anarumo, Bengals defensive coordinator, who's an absolute dog, put like great quarterbacks in the blender, right? We've seen him scramble the brains of some of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. What is he going to do to friggin' I'm seeing ghost Sam Darnold, So I do have a little more concern about the train being kept on the track than you do. That said, it's not as if you're going to bench, I play every single snaps Christian McCaffrey. You're not going to bench Ayuk. You're not going to bench George Kittle. So it's really you're just going to have to cross your fingers and live with it. So on the Bengals side of it, how do you think this offense looks like coming off a bye? Joe Burrow, is he going to be healthier? T. Higgins is going to be healthier? When do we start to see something that looks more like the Bengals of old?
Well, they're going to have to start getting a little bit more from T. Higgins, I think, is really what it comes down to, right? Like the Bengals of old, it's like, we've talked about this on our RP pod, but they just love to go downfield, And it's like, what are you going to do? It basically, Burrow looks on to the right, to the left, who's got single coverage, and whoever has I'm throwing it there. It doesn't matter how good the coverage is. Doesn't matter how tight the coverage is. He's throwing it there because he's going to let his guys go make a play. T. Higgins has just not really been himself recently, right? So if he gives him that vertical aspect yet again, then I think this offense starts to find itself a little bit better, right? But as we are sitting here today, listen, man, they also need to start getting a little bit more out of the run game. I don't know how they go about doing that. And to me, I've got Mixon as a fade this week pretty easily. Obviously, look, San Francisco allows the fifth fewest rush yards per game. And Mixon, man, he's just been so average. And I feel like he's been average throughout his entire career, but man, especially this year, he just looks like, I don't know. He looks like kind of like Alexander Madison out there a little bit, a little bulky. Sure, he'll produce if you give him 30 touches, but limited spots, man, not that much explosiveness. I don't know. I've got Mixon as a hard fade this week.
Yeah, he's going to have one eruption game like he did with the Carolina Panthers matchup last year. That's going to come at some point because he's just getting so much work.
Right.
But the Alexander Madison comparison is like dead on. He was kind of like a running back dead zone back hiding in plain sight in like the first 3 rounds. So that has been the case with Joe Mixon this year. All right, let's move into the stream category. This one is a bulkier category because there's so many games that I think could go either way. It's one great team maybe being dragged down by another team. We'll see. A perfect example of this, could see it going either way. Minnesota Vikings going to Green Bay to take on the Packers. It's a 41.5 point over under. The Vikings are coming. These are two teams coming in at polar opposite directions, right? Vikings are riding high. They just beat the 49ers. Monday Night Football. Everybody watched it. Everybody's like, damn, Matt Harmon and Andy Behrens talked a lot of crap about Kirk Cousins about 4 hours on their podcast before Monday Night Football, and that did not age well when it published Tuesday morning. My God, Kirk Cousins looking really good. On the other end of it, Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers really struggled and lost to the unserious Denver Broncos operation. So how do you see this one going?
It's not just that they lost to Denver. If they lost like a high scoring game, I think we feel better about it, right? It's the fact that Jordan Love, his confidence looks shot. Listen, the 2 touchdowns that he had in that game too, one of them could have easily been both of them could have been picks.
Yeah.
Let's be real, right? Like the ball gets tipped and his guy comes down. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, one is late and behind. Romeo Doubs gets his hands on it, bounces off his hands right to Jaden Reed. And it's tough because the Packers offense is in an unforeseen or an unusual zone for them right now because they've got like the quarterback experts who do great work on the internet being like, oh, Jordan Love has actually not been that bad. Like it's been that there's it's kind of the surrounding cast, but also then you have people kind of saying Jordan Love has regressed from his start to the year. And it's one of those things like, it's very Bearsian, right? Andy talks about this on the podcast where we start going like, well, is it the quarterback? Is it the coach? Is it the surrounding cast? And it's like all of these things can be true.
Right,
like,
right.
Even if Jordan Love was playing above average, at quarterback from an isolation standpoint, this receiver room is so young. Luke Musgrave seems to be involved in like some embarrassing play every single week. So it's really tough to have a lot of confidence with any Packers going into this game.
Yeah, no, you're right. Look, Jordan Love has 7 interceptions versus 4 passing touchdowns over his last 4 games. And again, I think realistically that could be 9 interceptions to 2 touchdowns. But even 7 to 4 is pretty bad over his last 4. And Love has not topped 185 passing yards in 2 straight games, right? So he is at the lowest of lows right now. Meanwhile, Kirk Cousins, I think he's a very strong start. I know Green Bay's allowed the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, but man, they're down a couple of key pieces, right? Like Darnell Savage, Eric Stokes, both go on IR this week. Man, I think Kirk Cousins has a really good opportunity to, again, post another really strong performance in back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, and obviously Jordan Addison coming off a very perfectly Jordan Addison type of game where you saw him struggle sometimes with physical coverage, but man, he can just, those in-breaking routes are just Jordan Addison plays, man, and he can rip you there. So I like him again this week. Obviously, TJ Hawkinson and the backfield, you really can't play either of these guys, Madison or Cam Akers. So with any degree of confidence. So we just kind of have to see if that rotation sorts itself out. All right, next team up.
I do have Madison as a start there. Again, Green Bay is really soft against the run. I've got Cam Akers as a deep sleeper, man, because again, the matchup is, I think, pretty good. And dude, his snap share has been going up. He actually had more carries than Madison last week. Oh, and listen, I can't do a podcast without talking about a deep sleeper. And I know you'll like this one. I've got Jaden Reed as a deep sleeper in this matchup, man, because Reed plays 70% in the slot, and Minnesota has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to inside wide receivers.
Yeah, Christian Watson banged up too. We'll have to track his status throughout the weekend, and he's just not a guy that's going to command like, all right, 10 targets off the bus going to Christian Watson. He's just not that type of player. So I think Reed can pop up in a variety of ways. I really hope they continue to get him more involved because, my God, it's just been a bit of a slog over there. Yeah, he's a good player. All right, next game up here. Another division matchup. New England Patriots at Miami Dolphins. Dolphins are 9.5 point favorites, 45.5 over under. However, James, Tyreek Hill, the week when everybody, including, me and watch for the name drop, Jerry Rice, talking about him as an MVP candidate here on the Yahoo Sports Network. Yeah. He pops up on the injury report with a hip situation. Tua is like, well, he might be back some point down the line. So the alarm bells are going off on like, what is going on with Tyreek Hill? How much is obviously, this is a stupid question, but I'm going to ask you anyways. How much does that change the outlook for the Miami Dolphins if Tyreek Hill doesn't play?
Well, look, he's obviously a borderline MVP candidate, offensive player of the year candidate for sure. And yeah, if he doesn't go with the hip injury, it changes, I think, the complete tone and tenor of this Miami offense, because where do they go outside of we talk about depth charts a lot, Matt, but Miami's obviously in a great position where they've got one like historically great wide receiver and another guy who could legitimately be an all-pro as well in Jalen Waddle, right? But then from there, it's like a cataclysmic drop off to the next guy. Right. So if either one of those guys misses time, it's like, oh my goodness, what does that second wide receiver look like? What are we talking? Cedric Wilson here? Braxton Barrett? I mean, it's like there's no one.
They call him up chosen again. They're getting chosen in the mix.
No, golly. So no, it's going to be, I'm not going to say it's going to be a disaster, but yeah, Mike McDaniel's certainly going to have, his work cut out for him for sure. So yeah, that's something that we got to keep an eye on, man. By the way, this whole Tyreek Hill saga that's happening on Twitter right now is so funny. Did you see this where ESPN came out with their analytics and said he's like outside the top 25, Tyreek Hill, in terms of yards over expected after the catch. And then one of their analytics guys said he's not even a top 10 wide receiver. You're like, what? Bro, that is insane. And then I saw this morning, Next Gen Stats then comes out and like completely like subliminal shots says that Tyreek Hill has the third most yards over expected after the catch. I'm like, man, we're really firing off these analytics shots. I love it.
Yeah, the analytics wars. Listen, yes, I am familiar. I've seen what's been going on. You know me, buddy. I try to stay above the fray. Right? I'm sure, and I have had people like, are you gonna weigh in on this? Are you gonna weigh in on this? Right? Like, you're gonna get reception perception in on this. It's like, no. Number one, I'm not doing that. I do not do internet beefs. I will just say, obviously, I disagree with the findings of this ESPN
not
stuff.
Not a top 10 wide receiver. What is going on there? That's
dude,
crazy.
I did actually post his profile from the summer, and like, I mean, look, this is like a silly topic to even be spending time on the podcast, but whatever, we're doing it anyways. I posted his profile from the summer, and like going into this year, I would have concluded that there is, I mean, obviously Justin Jefferson is worth the discussion, but I would argue there is no more valuable player to their offense. I mean, certainly wide receiver to their offense than Tyreek Hill, because they ask him to do everything. Like it's the insane. Pre-snap motion stuff. Okay, yeah, you see the difference between like freaking Tutu Atwell doing the like cheat motion, full speed motion at the stop, and then like now you have Tyreek Hill doing it, who not only might be the fastest dude on the might not only be the fastest dude on the football field, he's also a great route runner. He's been over 80% success rate versus press and reception perception, and like I think all but one of his seasons he's been an elite separator, an elite route runner, and yeah, he's obviously great after the catch. I don't even know what we're doing there. And he's also a great contested catch receiver. And we see this with the like, Tua overthrew him down the field. Well, there's nobody better at like working back to the football and then winning it in tight coverage. Like I can remember talking with Chris Wessling back at the NFL Network days and being like, it is sacrilegious to compare anybody to Steve Smith, but if there is like a small, fast dude who also wins at the catch point like Steve Smith, it is Tyreek Hill. So you know what, James? I said I wasn't going to weigh in on it. And I think I kind of just weighed in on the podcast. But yeah, look, if he doesn't play, it completely like cataclysmically changes the way their offense is going to function.
Yeah, we did get a note here that Tyreek Hill did return to practice, bringing normal cheetah energy per Cameron Wolf down there in Miami. I think I saw Raheem Mostert also return to practice, and that one's important too, right? Because, again, really good matchup on the table here for Miami from a run game perspective, especially when you take a look at game script. But if it's not Mostert, then who does it end up being? And again, if Mostert doesn't go, but he did practice today, but if he doesn't go, all of a sudden Jeff Wilson becomes a really, really popular name to keep an eye on.
Should we talk about the other team that's participating in this game? The New England Patriots.
I don't know. Should we?
I will say, James, I liked the way that they changed the offense a bit last week. They got the ball out quick. They ran a lot more in breaking routes. They got this guy, Demario Douglas, who charted his routes this morning. Guy can play a little bit. I do think he gives them some separation ability against man coverage, which I will give a tip of the hat to the ESPN analytics. They had, like Juju and Devontae Parker among the worst separators in the NFL. Right. And I would absolutely agree with that finding. They're dead on with that one. I don't agree with the Tyreek Hill stuff. I do agree with that. Kendrick Bourne, I like his ability a little bit. So I don't know, man. God forbid, I'm the guy that's going to like stick up for the Patriots offense, but I do think if they continue this identity that we saw with them last week and they have Kendrick Bourne involved and they have Douglas involved, I think that gives them a little bit more juice than we were previously seeing.
And again, it's just that Miami is low key not very good on defense.
No, they're not.
That's what it really comes down to. No one's really talking about that because their offense is just, it's a fireworks show every single week. But Vic Fangio is transitioning these guys into his system. And I've been saying for weeks now, you better get Miami now, because week 15, 16, 17, when Fangio has his hooks in these guys, it's going to be a different ball game, but right now they're trying to figure out what they're doing, and they're trying to figure out and fit themselves into this Fangio system. And it's just not totally clicking right now. Right. So You take a look at what they're doing up front, it's actually pretty good, right? Like they've got 24 sacks. That's the third most in the NFL. But then against outside wide receivers, they're getting gashed, right? They're giving up the second most receptions per game, a 71.3% completion rate to outside wide receivers. Again, that's seventh worst in the NFL. They're giving up the eighth most fantasy points per game to outside wide receivers. So for those reasons, I think Mac Jones is, again, especially in Superflex or whatever, a very playable asset. I think I've got him down as a sleeper candidate here this week at the quarterback position. Not that you probably don't need a sleeper quarterback with no teams on a bye, but whatever. If you're out there, you need it. He's there. And then I think Kendrick Bourne also, again, two really strong games in a row from Kendrick Bourne. I think he's established himself now, if he didn't before, as the go-to receiver in this New England passing attack.
I very much agree. I like Kendrick Bourne a lot this week. All right, let's move on to the next one here. Another divisional matchup. Philadelphia Eagles, 6.5 point road favorites going into Washington to take on the Commanders, 43.5 over under. You could argue that this game belongs in the binge category, James, and perhaps you'd like to argue that, but I refuse to put this Sam Howell sack brigade, this parade of sacks that Washington is just allowing on their, I would say allowing on their quarterback, but I think Sam Howell's responsible for most of it. I refuse to put that in the binge category because I don't really want to lay eyes on it too much. But, I think a lot of people will put a lot of stock in the high scoring game that we got out of this matchup a few weeks ago. And maybe you do, but man, the front is just cooking for Philadelphia right now. I mean, they were suffocating against Miami on Sunday night last week.
I agree.
I could obviously see this being a pretty problematic spot here for Sam Howell in this offense.
Yeah, it was a close loss for Washington in week 4. But bro, I just think this week it's just going to be completely different. They add Byard as well. It's just forget it. I think Washington's going to I think they're going to drown. Honestly, I think Philadelphia is going to overwhelm them. And you bring up the Sam Howell stuff. It's at the point now, Matt, where I'm actually intrigued by it. Like I want to see how many times this dude can get sacked in a game. Like, could you imagine? Like, I know he's on pace for 96, but after this
97.
game, 97. After this game, he's going to be on pace for 100. I promise you. Like, Philadelphia is just going to get after it, boy. Sam Howell's going to get, if Philadelphia is not your fantasy defense number 1, what are we doing out here? Okay. They're going to absolutely overwhelm Sam Howell. And I'm here for it, man. Like, honestly, I feel bad for Sam Howell. I do, but there's that morbid curiosity too of like, how many times can this man actually get sacked? And I think he's going to get sacked another 5 times this week.
Well, dude, five is just a lock. He's going to just walk into 5 sacks. I'm wondering if we can get into like double digits. Do you know the record for most sacks in a game by a defense? I don't. What is it? It's 14 by the Philadelphia Eagles in 1952, according to StatMuse. Ironically, actually, that was against the New York Giants. Ironically, the second most sacks in a game ever was by the New York Giants against the Philadelphia Eagles in 2007. So the Eagles have been involved in a lot of these like most sacks ever performance. So I like it. Hassan Reddick, Jalen Carter, and the boys coming after Sam Howell. Look, I'm not wishing 14 sacks, or maybe we can get 15. I'm not wishing 15 sacks on Sam Howell. I don't want to see it. By the way, I saw Mary Kay Cabot, who covers the Cleveland Browns, because of the Deshaun Watson injury situation, post on, and I didn't read the article, so, I'm just being that guy, but post an article like, the Browns could try to pry Jacoby Brissett away from the Commanders before the trade deadline. Obviously, he started before Deshaun Watson was reinstated last year. I'm looking at that tweet, and maybe she's definitely more sourced on this than I am, but I'm sitting there thinking, the Commanders are probably sooner to having to start Jacoby Brissett than trading him away. A, because Sam Howell will not survive this.
There's no way.
There's no way. He can't survive it, A, and B, the team can't survive it. You can't keep giving up sacks like this and continue to go forward. So Look, I know we spent a lot of time on the sack stuff. I think
it's an interesting story because we've never seen something like this. We've never seen something like this. Come on, dude. This is nuts.
It is pure morbid curiosity. So we'll see if Sam Howell takes 15 sacks and breaks the record against the Eagles, and the Eagles are involved in another high sack game. Maybe not. Either way, like the only guy I'm confident starting at this point because of all of this nonsense out of Washington is Terry McLaurin.
That's it. Yep.
That's it. Like even the running backs now, like they're getting Chris Rodriguez in the mix. That like makes Brian Robinson, who's already game script dependent, even murkier. You know, they like Chris Rodriguez apparently. He's a big, like Eric Bieniemy was a big fan of his. Eric Bieniemy, a former running back. So that's it from Washington. And I mean, look, with the Eagles side of it too, they're also a pretty cut and dry team. Look, AJ Brown gave this team a nightmare last time they played. But look, I'll say this for the seems like 100th week in a row. This is a pretty good setup for Devonta Smith to have a bounce back game, but you know, we kind of know the story there.
I'll give you an interesting game script stat on Brian Robinson here. In the 3 wins, Brian Robinson has averaged 18.7 PPR points per game. In the 3 losses of 7+ or more, Robinson has averaged 7.87 PPR points per game. So again, 7.87 in 7+ point losses, and then 18.7 in the 3 wins. So you talk about game script, man, like that is unbelievable. It's an 11-point swing between big losses and then just straight up wins. That's pretty nuts.
Yeah, pretty wild stuff, man. It makes him a very murky fantasy play. That's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Next game up here, Houston Texans, 3-point favorites going into Carolina to play the Carolina Panthers, 43.5 over under. Obviously, a lot of takes are going to be flying from this one because it is the number 2 overall pick in the draft versus the number 1 overall pick in the draft. Frank Reich this week is in press conferences having to, you know, take questions from a good buddy Joe Person about like, was it really Bryce? And, you know, Frank Reich is like, my eyes were on Bryce the whole time. Frank Reich is also giving up play calling duties. Miles Sanders is talking to the media about how pissed he is at himself for not being good this year. Vibes out of Carolina are what they've been for the first 6 weeks of the season. Vibes in Houston are great. So how do you see this one going?
Well, again, this one has potential to be, I don't know, at least a respectable game. I'm not going to say high scoring because I don't think Carolina can hold up their end. But I think Houston's defense, even though they've played a lot better, still has a long ways to go, especially on the ground. So if Carolina wants to get something done from the running back perspective, and again, I don't know who the running back's going to be, but if they want to run the ball, I think they'll be able to do it. And again, Houston actually is dead last in terms of total sacks on the season, and Carolina on their side, they have the lowest quarterback pressure rate, right? So we're talking about 2 teams that are going to struggle to get to the quarterback, which should, I think, open up the passing game here a little bit. So I am intrigued from that angle.
Yeah, and obviously if Carolina's passing game is able to find any success, we know it's going one direction. It's going to Adam Thielen in the slot.
Yes.
I'll at least keep my eyes on Jonathan Mingo as a potential post-buy rookie bump candidate, but I don't think he's anywhere near the fantasy radar at this point. And then in Houston, man, they're going to get their own rookie back in Tank Dell. I think Tank Dell is in a really, really nice spot here, along with Nico Collins, who's like a must start every single week.
Yeah, absolutely. Carolina, by the way, is bottom 12 in terms of fantasy points allowed to outside wide receivers. So I think this is actually a really, really good spot. They've given up the 4th most yards per game to outside wide receivers, and bro, a 72% completion rate to outside wide receivers. Man, that's 5th worst in the NFL. I think that again, Tank Dell and Nico, really, really good spots here. By the way, Dameon Pierce is in a great spot. I don't think he's a good system fit at all for what Houston is doing. But in this particular game, the matchup is way too nice. And I tell you what, if he puts together a really good game here, where Carolina allows the 2nd most fantasy points per game to the running back position, 5.3 yards per carry allowed, 2nd worst in the NFL. If Pierce puts together a really good game here in week number 8, you've got to look to trade him, man. I was saying trade him after that touchdown game 2 weeks ago, but this game, I think he's got a really nice chance to put a nice number on the board. And if he does, you got to look to move him, man. He's just, it just does not look like the right fit. And remember, this is not their guy. This is not the coaching staff's guy, right? This is the fantasy community's guy. Okay. The coaching staff there, Bobby Sloat, that's not his guy. Right. So I'm a little bit concerned there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. I'm a little bit more of a sucker for Pierce, but we shall see. I think that actually is probably pretty good and sound advice. So let's move on to the next game here. Cleveland Browns at Seattle Seahawks, 38.5 over under here. Seahawks are 3.5 point home favorites. I have this game in the stream category, even though PJ Walker is going to be starting for the Cleveland Browns. Neither of these teams have really played offensively, at least up to expectations. Pretty rough matchup for the Seahawks offense. Obviously, the Browns defense is very good, and Geno and the boys have not met expectations so far this year.
It's so interesting, right? What an interesting matchup this is, because we knew that Geno is, and last year was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL. Meanwhile, Cleveland allows a 53.8% completion rate to quarterbacks. That's the best rate in the NFL. 53.8% in today's NFL. That is nuts, man. Mm-hmm. They also allow the fewest pass yards per game. So obviously, as you can imagine, outside, inside wide receivers, all the numbers are depressed across the board when you're going against Cleveland. So what does that look like for DK Metcalf? Lockett missed practice earlier this week. Whether he plays, he's going to carry a questionable tag. What's DK going to do? A lot of question marks in this one. And it's like, you just can't sit those guys. But at the same time, it's like, there's no teams on a bye. I think there's going to be a lot of teams tempted to sit Lockett and DK.
No, I totally get it. Man, it's interesting, right? Because I feel like they're this close, but then also it's not happening. And this is such a tough spot to try and get it to happen.
Very tough spot. Very tough spot.
Man, yeah. And I think JSN had a nice statistical performance last week, but I still wouldn't say I'm seeing like an NFL difference maker yet, which I know is tough because he was the first receiver drafted. I think he's going to be a very good player in the NFL, but I don't think he's necessarily been like a needle mover to this point. On Cleveland's side, Amari Cooper, rough performance last week. It is PJ Walker. I continue to say that like Elijah Moore is looking really good and like he's getting separation. He's also he's good in ESPN's open score metric as well. Don't love some of the Mickey Mouse routes they have him run, but nevertheless, I think he's still a good player. But like, how can you have any real degree of confidence with anyone in this pass game with PJ Walker? And like, I think Seattle's defense has been better than expected. And we're probably not going to get Jerome Ford for the next few weeks either.
I've got Elijah Moore actually as a sleeper here in this matchup. Seattle's given up the second most fantasy points per game to the slot. And Elijah Moore obviously has played inside about 50% of the time. More inside than outside if you don't consider all the weird stuff they've got him doing in the backfield as well, right? So Moore has seen 7+ targets in 5 of 6 games. It's pretty good volume overall. So you figure at some point that's got to hit, but the quarterback situation there is certainly questionable. So I don't know. I have him as a sleeper. It's not full throated though. I'm not like all in on Elijah Moore this week.
I don't think he's a guy you need to play with no teams on a bye, right?
Agreed. Totally agree. But I will say though, I think Kareem Hunt is interesting. You mentioned no Jerome Ford. Kareem Hunt, it's not a great matchup. Let's be real here, right? Like Seattle allows the league best 2.87 yards per carry to running backs. So it's not a great matchup, but he's the only game in town, no Jerome Ford. Who else do they even have on this roster that they're even comfortable throwing out there? Obviously the answer is no one because they brought back Kareem Hunt. Right. So, they're obviously not that comfortable with anyone else on the roster. So I think he's the only show in town. And I don't know, man, like you're going to go ahead and play him because he's running back and, you probably need him.
Yeah. Pierre Strong, I think at least should be on like benches in deep leagues and stuff like that. Just in case he's a guy they did trade for prior to the season. But yeah, I think Kareem Hunt is probably the odds on favorite to lead the team in carries. Let's move on to the next one here. Baltimore Ravens, 8.5-point road favorites going into Arizona to face the Cardinals, 44.5-point over-under. James, Kyler Murray is a full participant in practice this week. Are we going to get Kyler Murray's debut? Part of me is like, damn, you really want to throw him out against the Ravens in the first game? Like, Mike McDonald might be calling defensive plays better than anybody else in the NFL right now. Not a real soft landing spot. Here you go, Kyler. Good luck. But next week, they face the Browns in Cleveland, like not a soft landing spot there either. So shoot, you might as well just get it over with.
I mean, I guess if I'm Arizona, I'm like, hey, Kyler, let's just slow down here. You know, let's take a couple games off, go play some more Call of Duty. I think there's a new Call of Duty coming out. It's fine. Just chill out. It's all good. We'll run Joshua Dobbs out there and we'll just get him, just absolutely
They just dropped Spider-Man, the video game, right?
Oh, there you go.
Is he into Spider-Man? I don't know.
I don't know. Probably. Who's not into Spider-Man? So that's great. No, but look.
November 10th. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. There's a third one now?
Yeah.
Releases on Friday, November 10th. So unfortunately, Kyler's going to have to just go out there and play these next two games because by the time we come back to
Call of Duty, right?
Well, by the time we come to week 10, that's going to be November 12th against the Falcons. He'll have been in Call of Duty world at that point. So I think they're gonna have to. So disrespectful, dude. I'm actually really intrigued to see what Kyler looks like on this team because
I agree.
They're slotted now to pick second in the draft. They're starting to get kind of back to expectations. It's like, that was cute. You guys were nice and plucky to start the season. You're better. You're not a complete joke. You're not outright tanking, but you're also not very good. That's where they're at right now. Josh Dobbs is. I'm not going to say started to turn back into a pumpkin, but he's a backup quarterback playing extended time. We get the whole deal here. I don't know what Kyler's going to look like, but I think Marquise Brown has played well. It's a revenge game for Marquise Brown. Michael Wilson has flashed, the rookie receiver. I'm at least intrigued to see what he looks like.
I love the Hollywood Brown thing and the revenge angle of that. Of course, I love that. Definitely, I think a strong start this week. But that being said, man, Baltimore has a lot of the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. They're an 8-point favorite. I've got Gus Edwards as a very strong start because of game script and all those things. And I know Trey McBride is really popular because Ertz went on IR. So the opportunities will certainly be there, but man, Baltimore's allowed the second fewest fantasy points per game to the tight end position. They have not allowed a single touchdown to that position group yet, right? So I'm very cautious about Trey McBride this week. I think he should be rostered 100%. Just don't know if you want to roll him out this week.
Yeah, and Ravens obviously they got their best offensive performance last week. Now they're going into a very nice matchup here against the Cardinals. I think Zay Flowers is a strong start. I'm not going to go so far as to say Rashad Bateman is back, but he did have a couple of nice plays in that game against the Detroit Lions last week, getting open against press man coverage. I think he looked better from an isolation standpoint last week than he has at any point last year. So Odell Beckham had some moments. I think the Ravens are in a really nice spot here from a pass game perspective.
Do you think that Odell, I've got him as a sleeper, and the reason being is Arizona's just been getting gashed by outside wide receivers, 75% completion rate to outside wide receivers. That's the third worst in the NFL. By the way, man, I feel like we're not giving Odell enough grace in terms of the guy didn't play football last year.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that he needed this time to ramp up to game speed. I'm very curious. I think Odell's an actual interesting buy because you could buy low right now, like rock bottom low,
right?
And roster him deep into your benches and just see what happens.
I bet he's gotten dropped in a couple of spots. I'm sure several leagues he's been dropped, and just stick him on your bench. And I'm really hoping that both of these guys, because Bateman, same thing, missed a ton of time, a lot of complicated injuries. He got injured again to start this year. Maybe he's just a guy that's never healthy, but I'm hoping that both of these guys, the more ramped up to get, I think they both looked much better last week than at any other point. And honestly, look, they signed Beckham for, November, December, January games. They didn't sign him to win games in freaking September and stuff like that. So I'm with you. Right. I like holding out a little hope there for those receivers. Last game in the stream category, Chicago Bears at LA Chargers on Sunday Night Football, 46.5-point over under. We could talk about the Bajent Bears, but really I'm interested in where you are with the LA Chargers. Disappointing last couple of games for Justin Herbert. You and I both have concerns, I think, about the verticality of this offense with Quentin Johnston not emerging. So I don't know, but it's a get right spot against the Bears at home.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, obviously the Bears played way better defensively last week, and I do wonder if that goes hand in hand with their offense, because I felt like their offense, not that it was explosive by any stretch of the imagination, because it wasn't, but it was on track and on time. And I felt like that helped their defense out just a little bit. Justin Herbert just has not looked the same, and I'm surprised no one's brought it up in the broadcasts, but the finger injury on his offhand, remember when he originally had it, he couldn't grip the football. That's how bad it hurt. So I do think that that's impacting him quite a bit, to be honest with you, because he just hasn't looked right the last couple of weeks here. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's a great spot for Austin Eckler. You know, I know he's dealing with a minor injury, but he has practiced in full here, so I think he should be good to go. Chicago's allowed the second most receiving yards per game to the running back position, so I think Eckler could be in line. By the way, they're just not throwing him the ball enough. And I feel like if Herbert can't get the ball out downfield with the amount of accuracy that he wants to, bro, just check it down to Eckler. I think that's fine. I think everyone would be happy with that. You know, get the ball in his hands and let him work in space.
Totally agree with you. I'm just looking this up right now. Like, if you just look at the last 2 weeks in terms of like dropbacks under center, Justin Herbert's only taken 4 dropbacks under center that's been a big problem too, just running a traditional offense. They have not been able to like get under center. So that has been an issue, I think, with the finger as well. So look, the Chargers are pretty cut and dry from like a fantasy angle. I do think Josh Palmer is like a guy that you're considering as a wide receiver 3 at this stage.
Yep.
And on the Bears too, look, Bagent, give him credit. He's got the ball to DJ Moore, who is having a really nice season, I think, is a must start in this matchup. And Roschon Johnson, if he clears a concussion protocol, I'm interested to see what the workload split looks like there, because he's flashed, but it's mostly been in garbage time. And Deontay Foreman, guy's a tone setter, man. He is a tone setter. That sounds corny, but he's a tone setter on offense. It's a great matchup for him against the Chargers. And I mean, the Chargers 8.5-point favorites. Dude, you have confidence that the Chargers can beat anybody, even the Tyson Bagent Bears, by more than a touchdown at this point? I don't. I think this is a fine game script. I think it's a great matchup for Foreman. So I think if he's still leading the backfield in carries, which I assume he kind of will be, I think he's a good start this week.
I just don't understand why he was inactive all this season. Like, what's going on here? I mean, this guy filled in for Derrick Henry, looked great. He filled in for CMC, looked great. Right. And now he's over here. And again, it's just like, oh, yeah, you're going to give me an opportunity after 6 weeks. Yeah, sure. I'm going to go out there and absolutely crush. Right. So I don't know, man. Like, he's proven time and time again, Deontay Foreman has, that he's more than not just a fill-in back. He's an actual NFL starter at this position. So I think it's going to end up being probably a 50-50 split, because that's just what they do. And I think Roschon Johnson will get, some of the passing work, but you're right, man. Deontay Foreman is just an absolute hammer on the ground.
All right, let's move into the skip category here, and we can pick up the pace on these games because they're skipped. They're deserved. Yeah, Atlanta Falcons, 2.5-point favorites going to face the Tennessee Titans, 35.5-point over under here. The Falcons are the Falcons. I don't really know what else to say. People are all over Arthur Smith for his press conference this week. Some deserved, some certainly deserved to be on Arthur Smith after the whole Bijan Robinson debacle. Oh Titans, man. Look, I know we don't really care about the Titans in fantasy other than Derrick Henry. They're going to probably start Will Levis, but maybe Malik Willis mixes in. I mean, this game is made for the skip category.
Oh, God, it's so disgusting. It's gross. What's the quarterback play looking like? I mean, even with Desmond Ridder, we're talking Desmond Ridder versus Will Levis. Oh, God, forget about it. I'm out on this one.
I'll say this for Ridder. It's pretty like damning with faint praise to say when he's not committing mind-breaking, like back-breaking turnovers. That is damning with faint praise at the quarterback position. Yeah, but when he's not doing that, I do think he's played a little bit better the last 3 weeks. He's stopped taking sacks. He's starting to pull the trigger a little bit more. But again, you got to also not fumble the friggin' football at the going into the end zone. You can't do it.
That was so brutal. It's like, bro, you're under fire, and the one thing that you can control is effort, right? And it's like, come on, man, like just run hard to the end zone and or move the ball to the opposite hand, you know?
Yeah,
it's like
at the very least, man. Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
It's brutal,
anyways, that was really bad. By the way, this Atlanta defense is really prone to getting burned by tight ends. Okay, so
don't tell me to start Chig.
I'm not saying start Chig, but I'm saying if you're in a DFS tournament and you're looking for a throwaway tight end, Chig is going to be super affordable. Atlanta's allowed a 9+ PPR tight end in 5 of 7 weeks. Okay. Hayden Hurst, Sam Laporta, Evan Ingram, Dalton Schultz, and Cade Otton have scored more than 9 PPR points against the Atlanta Falcons. I just feel like, again, if it's Will Levis and they want to start getting some quick game going, it might be Chig getting some of that work, man. I don't know. Atlanta, but like I said, Atlanta's been gashed by tight ends, and so it's at least worth a name to mention.
I mean, dude, I just at least looked at what's Chig's receiving line prop, just like maybe I want to feel alive and watch just sweat at 14 and a half. It's not posted because Will Levis might be starting it, because Mike Vrabel's doing we're not going to rule out Ryan Tannehill yet, but also we're not telling you who we're starting. Like somebody said that Will Levis is starting. I didn't say that. So Vrabel's doing his thing. Gotta love it. It's not posted yet, but I mean, if you want to feel alive, you can bet the over on Chig's receiving yard prop, because I don't think
it's going to be like 12 and a half.
Yeah, it's going to be 14 and a half, maybe 14 and a half. So you know what, James? Just because of that, I'm gonna bet on it this week, and we can enjoy this thing together. All right, next game up. Oh my God, New Orleans Saints 1.5 point favorites in Indianapolis, going to take on the Colts. I feel bad for putting the Colts in the skip category, James, because I really like that offense. I love a lot of these players, and Shane Steichen I'm very high on, but I think, I've charted a lot of bad offenses in my day, doing all the receivers and stuff. I mean, there are some weird names in the reception perception database. I'm not sure there's ever been a more unpleasant offense to watch than what the Saints are rolling out this season. And, there's people out there like, well, it's not Derek Carr's fault and all this stuff. And look at all this other stuff that's going on around him. It's like, yes. Well, number one, okay, he's not helping matters. Number two, I'm with you. There's nothing good happening here. I mean, they have everything about an offense that I hate. Where one, it's a quarterback who's not running the plays, who's checking down. That drives you nuts.
Yep.
And they've also got a very talented receiver in Chris Olave, who's one of my guys that I really love.
Right.
And the temptation there is to be like, it's all Derek Carr's fault. Yo, I'm telling you, Chris Olave got to play better. Okay. Got to play better. Got to run these routes out. Got to not do this stuff. That pisses me off. That like that I can't immediately just blame everything on Derek Carr. That makes me mad. Okay. They've also got not one, but 2 gimmick players. They've got Taysom Hill. We all know that. I don't know if people realize this, but like they also have been giving snaps to Lynn Bowden. Do you remember Lynn Bowden? He was drafted by the John
Dolphins?
Gruden Raiders draft?
Okay. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it was.
I can't remember who drafted him, but either way, he was drafted by I think he was drafted by the Raiders. I mean, we have the internet. We could look this up, but he was drafted by them and then immediately traded, I think, to the Dolphins at the end of training camp. Like, oh, nope. We were going to maybe draft him as a wide receiver, a running back. No, let's move him around. And then they traded him. The year they drafted him, they traded him. He's like taking legit snaps for the Saints right now, but it is only on run plays. It's the biggest tell of all time. Lynn Bowden's on the field. They're running the friggin' football. They're doing that's it. And so this offense is driving me nuts. That is why they're in the skip category here.
Yeah, and listen, Olave's got a great matchup against this Colts secondary, right? The Colts have allowed a 20-point PPR outside wide receiver in 4 of 7 games, man. Yeah. That is insane. 4 of 7 games, they've allowed a 20-point PPR outside wide receiver. Come on, bro. Olave, obviously, who plays almost exclusively outside. It should be a smash spot for him.
Yeah. It should.
I think he's going to react to the criticism. I do. I think he's going to respond positively.
I mean, he was arrested this week, so we need some good vibes.
Oh my God!
Here. Oh man, it just really, and like I don't want to, be like I'm criticizing Chris Olave, but like I am criticizing the way he's playing because he's playing like still, I don't want to say he's been playing poorly, but he's playing like a top 20 receiver when he could be a top 10 receiver. And that's, I think, the frustration here for me. But I agree with you. It is a perfect matchup for him to get right. Derek Carr, stop checking the ball down.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's one of those things where I hate this offense because you can see why Chris Olave is so frustrated. Like, nothing pisses off these guys out here that are running routes outside when they haven't even broken on the routes and the ball's out to the check down, right? And like, then you get every play receivers like throwing their hands up, whether it's Michael Thomas, whether it's Rashid Shaheed, he's doing it too. And I'm like, dude, I like you, Rashid Shaheed, but you're Rashid Shaheed. I mean, come on, man.
Right.
Like, exactly. You don't need to be acting like this when let's get back there and stop. Everybody's like showing each other up. It's embarrassing. So I'm with you that it's a theoretical great matchup for Olave. I hope he can deliver on it.
Yeah, theoretical for sure.
And on the other side of it too, I mean, I really like Michael Pittman. It's a tough matchup for Michael Pittman, but I think he's got such a good target floor. And our guy Josh Downs, man, is in a potential smash spot here.
Yeah, he's looking really, really good. And I'm surprised by how well he's been playing on a consistent basis too, right? It's not just one game or one play here and there. It seems like he's the guy right now for this Indianapolis Colts offense, right? And yeah, I've got him as a strong start. New Orleans allows the 6th most fantasy points per game to the slot. Downs is coming off of his best game of the season, 23.5 PPR points. Dude, he's gone for 13 plus PPR in 4 of his last 5 games. He's been a really, really good player, both in fantasy and in real life.
All right, let's move on to the next skip game here. New York Jets, New York Giants. Kind of waffled on this one, putting it in stream, but ultimately, at least these teams have sort of simplified things where like the guys we want to get the ball are getting the ball from a fantasy perspective, especially on the Jets side of things. And hey, our guy, Ty God Taylor, man. I mean, how many times back in the fantasy stronghold did we talk about Tyrod? He's back in our lives. And I mean, we'll see if Daniel Jones gets in the mix here. I think they can afford to be patient because of how well Tyrod has played.
And it's an injury too to Daniel Jones that you just don't want to mess around with, right? Like a neck injury, that's a little scary.
Especially when he's had a history of them.
Right, exactly, right. So the Giants do have the 2nd lowest projected point total for this week. And this game overall, man, 36.5 point total that's disgusting. That's unbelievable. That being said, I still like Breece Hall quite a bit. The Giants have really struggled against the run. They allowed 4.98 yards per carry to running backs. That's the 3rd worst in the NFL. And look, this is a continuation of last year. They struggled against the run last year, and it continues this year, right? So the Giants are dead last in yards before contact, and I just think Breece Hall's got a really, really good chance to break a long one if he can get there. But again, it's just, you got to worry about touchdowns, in this one because 36.5 point total is going to be pretty tough.
I still think Garrett Wilson's in a good spot too, though. The volume's been there. I think they've got to the point where it's like, all right, we don't care if it's single high, 2 high, whatever the coverage look is. You hit your back foot, Zach, and if Garrett's like in a good position, you rip that ball to him no matter what. Like he's been dominating targets the last 2 games. I think that should continue here. You're always going to be a little bit sad because of the season that could have been for sure. Garrett Wilson, but I think he's in a pretty decent spot here. Last game up, somehow Monday Night Football, we've got Las Vegas Raiders at Detroit Lions. Lions are 8.5 point home favorites, 45.5 point over under. Jimmy G returned to practice on Thursday. He looks like he's in line to play. I will say, if I knew that Jimmy G was going to play in practice, I probably put this game in the stream category. Okay. I might even put this game in the binge category. Not because I like watching Las Vegas. I actually don't like watching this offense at all either because they seem to find new creative and inventive ways to get Devontae Adams or Jacoby Myers killed every single game. Like that's not fun.
No.
But the Lions are fun, and Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams, who I just mentioned, at least are very good at football.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, look at the quarterback they've got, right? Like when you're talking about Jimmy G, what does he do? He throws in-breaking routes, right? And with not a lot of arm strength. When you throw in-breaking routes with not a lot of arm strength, yeah, you're going to put, those are a lot of murder balls being thrown up there, right? So like, that's not good. It's an absolute smash spot for Jahmyr Gibbs. Again, you mentioned Detroit, 8-point favorite in this one. And the Lions with the 3rd highest implied total, tied with Kansas City this week. So Gibbs is in a really great spot from a game perspective, game script perspective, and Las Vegas allows the 5th most fantasy points per game to running back. So great game script, great explosive player, great matchup. Jahmyr Gibbs has all the makings to just be an absolute smash spot today or this week.
I like it. Really good call, man. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is in a good spot as long as Dave Montgomery, and Dan Campbell's kind of a straight shooter. He talked this week about how impressed he was with the way he's played and everything. Like last week when he got a ton of work, a lot of it in garbage time. But I continue to tell people, like, coaches are still evaluating that. Okay. Like, they're not looking at it as like, well, none of that happened in the fourth quarter. None of it matters. I mean, sometimes that's the case, but not in a situation when you're trying to evaluate a rookie. So I like him. And otherwise, I think, again, this game could be pretty high scoring. It could be pretty fun from a fantasy perspective, and we mostly know where the ball is going. God help us, if it's Jimmy G throwing hospital balls or Josh Jacobs pounding in the line for 2 yards in a cloud of dust. You know where it's going.
No doubt. Hey, on the other side, I'm a little worried about Josh Jacobs because Detroit, man, you talk about a 1-year transformation. Detroit was not good against the run for years, and this year, all of a sudden, they're really good at stopping the run, man. 3rd fewest fantasy points per game allowed to running backs. 3rd fewest total yards. The 3.57 yards per carry, that's 7th best. And they also allow the 2nd lowest explosive run rate in the NFL. Detroit, all of a sudden, man, has been really, really good against stopping the run.
Yeah, they've built that defense up the last few years. That part's working out. The secondary can be hit or miss because they've had some injuries, but overall, man, I can't say no. I know they're just coming off getting waxed in Baltimore, but this sets up as a perfect get right spot for Detroit going back home to face a defense like this.
Right.
They can. Right. Max Crosby's a game wrecker, but they have the type of offensive line that's going to at least keep him at bay to get Jared Goff, favorable spots. And I mean, I'm with you, man. Josh Jacobs has just not been. It's just not going to, I just don't think it's going to happen for him this year, because of the offensive line play. I think he's kind of running in quicksand a little bit. So it's a tough spot for him overall, but hey, man, wasn't a tough spot for us. We did it. We previewed every game in week 8. James, appreciate your time, man.
Oh man, great time. A lot of fun. And anytime you need a guest spot, man, I'm more than happy to jump in.
Well, yeah, you don't see me enough at this point. So,
Right, exactly. We got, oh my God, man, just so many shows, but it's all good. I love it.
Yeah, of course. If you like James and I working together, you can hear us, Reception Perception, the show. You can check out James on Twitter at James D. Koh. I will say this for my guy, James. Nobody is just like grinding out free, like this guy is good. Play him this week, sleepers, start stuff like James is on Twitter right now. I mean, you literally are missing out. He's giving out a ton of great stuff there. Writes a good sleepers column every single week. So make sure you're keeping in with everything that James is doing. But for now, it's going to do it for us. Be sure to tune in to this very podcast first thing Monday morning to hear Scott Pianowski and I break down all the action from week 8. It's gonna be a very interesting week. So many games that could go either way. Until then, we're out.
Peace.